Hi, Sham. How you doing? I'm just trying to work on my technology for a minute here, make sure everything's okay. Can you hear me? Oh boy, I can't hear me. Let me know if you can hear me, you guys. Okay, great. Okay. Well, then I think we're in good shape. Let's go. Hi, Lillian. How you doing? I'm going to show my other kitty because she wasn't here the last time. She was the one that was shy. And she's really pretty. She's a pastel calico. And her name is Penny. She's just a sweetie. We'll see. She'll sit with me for a little bit. Now she's all out of sorts because I lifted her up. Okay, we'll wait another minute for people to check in. Well, we made it. Man, I'm pretty tired. Was there at work late? Oh, thank you, Lillian. I know, I think she's beautiful. So the practical's all set up, pigs all over the room. It's a crazy day, but I'm kind of excited to have the practical coming up and to be, gosh, done with the pigs. I bet we're all pretty done with that smell, aren't we? So looking forward to being done. Thank you, guys. I know, I think she's pretty cute myself. Whew. So just let me know what you guys are up for. I'm around for a little bit here before I get tired and we all go to sleep. But happy to answer whatever questions you have. Hiya, DT. Hi, Kanal. Tanisha. Thank you all for joining me. It's kind of fun, huh? Anusha. Good to see you. Hi, Victor. Yifang. Hi. And Neha, I missed you. Red Vic. Ooh, got all kinds of people. A few people I don't recognize. Awesome. Thanks for joining me. Hi, Alicia. And Siri. Good to see you all. So I hope you're not feeling too stressed out. I think you guys are doing awesome. Very happy. We only have to do the reflection for homework, right? Yeah, and that's not due till Monday, so relax. Don't worry about it tonight. I guess unless you have nothing better to do, but I assume you do. So what do we got here? Hi, Raghu. Do we need to know the parts of the kidney other than the nephrons, renal artery, and vein, and the ureter? Phew, yeah, that's plenty. Yeah, we didn't dissect the kidney, so I know we didn't see that cortex and medulla. They're just kind of nice general terms for inside and outer. It's not that big of a deal. We won't have it on the practical, so don't worry about that. Yes, Siri, the learning logs go with the reflection. So you can just do those when you hand in your reflection next week. Hi, Hia. How's it going? Oh, Sham, you got a big old... It's held for review. Wow. Seems like a perfectly nice question to me. I'm not sure what it's holding your question, Sham, but I can see it. God, I wonder if it's got a word like scrotum in it. I hate when the internet does that stuff. What's wrong with the word scrotum? It's perfectly fine. Okay, what's the different function between the scrotum and the scrotal sac? The scrotum is on the outside of the body, and so we talk about the scrotal sacs being down inside the scrotum. The function of the scrotum in general is to maintain the temperature of the sperm. So there's little muscles on it, and they can actually pull the scrotum closer to the body to keep the testes warmer. Or they can relax and let the scrotum hang down a little bit, and that keeps the testes a little bit cooler. So this kind of this amazing temperature control system that keeps the scrotum, the testes, I'm sorry, at just the right temperature. They need to be about 3 degrees cooler than the body. I don't know why, but that's the temperature at which the sperm develop the best. So you get sort of the maximum sperm production if you keep them at the right temperature. So the scrotum is this kind of little adjustable system for keeping them at the right temperature. Let's see there. Okay, Drew, hello. Hi, Hia. I'm doing great. A little tired, but good. Eric, what do we do? Hi, Eric. What do we do at a station without a pig? Is there a prompt or is it a chance to catch up? Kind of both. There's typically going to be like a short question where the pig is, and then because we know that it takes you time to actually identify and everything, and then there'll be some longer questions that you would need to write, more like explanations, at the next station, but it'll refer to the last. So for example, 1 would have a pig, station 1, and then 1X would have some questions about the pig at station 1. So just as a way for us to continue on and have something a little bit more extensive. Hi, Diksha. Gosh, I hope that's not really Donald Trump. I don't really want him at my live stream. But I'm happy to explain the format of the test. So it's pretty much what I just described. There'll be these sort of pairs of stations where there's a pig, like station 1 will have a pig, station 1X will have a question about the pig at station 1. Then the even-numbered station, station 2 is just a pig, so they'll be pretty straightforward questions. It's just a way for us to kind of mix it up and have some longer and some shorter questions. So that's about it. So there's 24 pigs, 36 stations, 1 minute each, an extra minute to finish the rotation, and another minute to check your answers at the end. So what does that get us to? 38 minutes. It's a 45-minute period, so we will keep it moving. Okay, but otherwise you're just going to be writing on your answer sheet. Well, we need to know the things that made up the nephron. I just talked about that, Anusha. Oh, like Bowman's capsule and that sort of thing? No, don't worry about that. It's not at that level. It's much more focused on the pig level. So, when we were doing the pig, we didn't get down into the microscopic stuff as much. There's going to be some questions about function, but it's nothing that we haven't already covered in class. Okay, so don't stress out about that, and not too obscure. It really is stuff that we've hit a bunch of times. Raghu, does the cecum connect the small and large intestine? No, it really doesn't. A lot of students say that, and I think it must say that in some textbooks, but it's located where the small intestine and large intestine connect, right? But if I were to sort of show it with my fingers here, if this were the, I guess the large intestine, and here's the small intestine coming in, right? They connect right here. Okay, let's go up a little higher. The part that's sticking out where my tip of my finger is where the cecum would be. So it's not actually connecting them. It's this extra little pouch sticking out outside of the part where they connect, right? So I don't like that description. First of all, it's not a function, right? But this idea that the small intestine comes in, here's the large intestine, and the cecum is this part up here that sticks out and makes a little extra pouch. Okay, so the function has to do with what's happening in the pouch, the bacteria that are living in there and helping to digest the cellulose, right? But the small intestine, if the food were right here, it would continue down this way, right? And then, of course, some goes here, and the bacteria are living here and able to break down that cellulose. We got some retracted messages. I'll let those go. Oops, I went back. Hold on, I'm falling behind. Okay, show. Sirius, the large intestine, anus, and rectum, part of the digestive or excretory? Good question. That's something that students also commonly mix up. So the idea is that, how to put this, your urine and your feces are different things, right? That's why we call them number 1 and number 2. They are completely different sources, completely different pathways. So your feces is coming from the leftovers of your food, okay? Mixed with things that your own digestive system has put in there, of course, and the bacteria and all that. So it just comes in one end, and whatever's left at the other end comes out. The urine is not like that at all. There's no input for the urine directly except your blood, right? So different waste products that your cells are putting in the blood will be filtered out in the nephrons, and those will be put into the urine, okay? So it's what we call cellular waste, right? It's drawn from the blood and then put in the urine. So that's the only source that it comes from, okay? And you're welcome, Eric. I just explained about the scrotum, so I'm going to move on. And the scrotal sac is just more like these membranes that hold the testes inside. They don't have a lot of function outside of that. The questions will be not much different than the kinds of questions we've been doing all along. There's going to be the standard, what is this? What is the system? What is the function? Some of them will say what comes before this, what comes after it. Some of them will be what flows through here. They're going to be relatively straightforward. There's really nothing that's again, very much different than what I've been asking you during the oral practicals. That's why we practiced in that way. Why do the vena cavas have thin walls? Okay, vena cava is plural. Veins in general have thin walls because they don't have the blood pressure that arteries have, right? Blood pressure is strongest in the arteries because the heart's actually pushing the blood. And if the heart's pushing the blood and the blood's pressing on the sides of the blood vessels, they have to be strong to withstand that. Once the blood slows down in the capillaries, nothing's pushing it again. It kind of just oozes along in this very sort of low pressure way, where it's not pushing on the sides. So you don't need to have these strong arteries. Also, arteries have a much more of an ability to constrict and dilate. So part of the thickness of them is this muscle that is able to control constriction and dilation. So there's a few different reasons for that. Thanks, Neha, for helping out with the testes one. Neil, hi Neil, do the spleen and the liver recycle white blood cells too? I don't know the answer to that. I'd say it's certainly possible, because the liver breaks down lots of stuff. I don't actually know the answer to that for sure. I don't know that they're recycled in the same way. The term recycling fits really well for the hemoglobin because you really do sort of take it out of one and put it in the next. You know, other cells are broken down all the time. I don't know how much of them gets used to make new cells and how much gets dumped in your blood and taken out. I'm not really sure. You know, that's kind of a level of detail we don't really need to get into. Anshul's asking, hi Anshul, about the function of the thymus tissue. So thymus is one of those slightly complex ones because it does belong in two systems, right? So you could do endocrine because it certainly secretes a hormone that has, you know, a function, right? But the function is related to the immune system. It also functions as a lymphatic organ in the sense that the lymph is able to flow through it, at least earlier in your life. Okay, and Vikram, I don't know you, but hello, welcome, and thanks for your contribution there. Yes, so the immune function that's happening is the actual maturing of the T cells, which is a way of saying that they develop the ability to eventually have an immune response. Okay, thanks, Ritvik. Good contribution there. Do we need to know anything really specific about the lymphatic system? More the organs and what they're doing, because this is the practical, so we're kind of a little more focused on structure and function. So, you know, as long as you can identify the functions related to the organs that you would identify in the pig, for our purposes, that's going to be sufficient. I have a new one here. Now this is Pinky. Hello, Pinky. He's the one that was with me last time. Let's see here. Neha, what is the difference between the thymus tissue and thymus glands? I don't particularly differentiate. I think some people think of the glands as the ones we saw in the throat and the tissue as the one over the heart. I don't know of any difference in function. Maybe there is. I'm not even sure humans have the thymus over their heart. So for our purposes, thymus is all you need. Okay, I'm just not going to worry about that level of detail. Diksha, we already mentioned that no, you don't need individual nephron stuff. Sham's asking, does the vagina have any function except for reproduction? Well, broadly speaking, I mean, you know, you obviously for intercourse as well as for actually having the baby come out. I mean, partly it's just a passageway. So women all the time have some mucus that comes out of their reproductive system that's going to come through the vagina. But really, it's the passageway between things, right? So anything that needs to go between the inside of the reproductive system and the outside world is going to go through the vagina, right? Raghu, does the epididymis store sperm cells, or does the epididymis only connect the testes to the vas deferens? The epididymis is actually where the sperm continue to develop, right? So they're actually functionally changing in that part of the reproductive system. So the meiosis and the kind of original cells are generated in the testes, but they're not even close to done. They have to grow their tails and kind of do a bunch of more specialization, and that occurs in the epididymis. And then the epididymis is actually what has the little muscles that contract and force the sperm out during ejaculation. So there's a bunch of function, actually, with the epididymis. David's asking, hi David, can you explain the spleen's circulatory function versus its lymphatic function? Sure, so the spleen, again, is one of these sort of complex organs that does a ton of things. Lymphatic is one of the lymphatic organs, meaning the lymph will flow through it, but also it's a major repository, which is a way of saying a storage place for certain kinds of immune cells. Many of the B cells sort of live there, right? So that they're the ones that could be making antibodies if that was needed. Many macrophages, which are sort of the first responders of the immune system, they live there, and they can get a message and go out to the part of the body where they're needed. The circulatory function is kind of related. There's a lot of blood cells that are stored in the spleen. So you've got red blood cells that are stored there, I believe some platelets as well, as kind of extra, right? Because if you do have some sudden blood loss or whatever, it gives you a way to sort of quickly refill your blood supply. And of course, it's doing the recycling of those old red blood cells as well, and kind of turning over that hemoglobin, which must make its way. I don't know the details of this. It must make its way down to the bone marrow, because that's where the new red blood cells are made. But I don't know the details of that. So Anshul's asking, would the liver also be considered a lymphatic organ since it breaks down red blood cells? Well, first of all, I would argue if we're talking about red blood cells, that's circulatory. You know, the liver is one of those really hard to classify ones, and I'm always going to keep coming back to this idea that we're the ones who made these categories, right? It's just a way for us to think about the body, because there's so many parts and it's so complex. But the liver has like 500 functions. Many of them are what we would call metabolic, meaning it does a lot of chemical reactions. So we don't even really put that in a system, right? You know, the only one we've associated the liver with in class is the digestive system, which, because of the bile production, which is, you know, a very small part of what the liver actually does. So in terms of breaking down red blood cells, I don't know. I guess I'd say it helps the circulatory system. I wouldn't really call it circulatory, because when we think circulatory, we think blood vessels, heart. You know, we've got kind of a pretty specific view of that. But again, I wouldn't get too hung up on that. You know, for something like the liver, I'd probably stick with digestive, because you're going to want to talk about bile, right? So, you know, I'd stick with the simple one. But yeah, that is a tough one to categorize. We got some retracted messages here. Here's Vikram. What are the functions of the ureter, urethra, and uterus? Yeah, isn't that kind of a neat little trifecta of U words there? So you have to keep all that clear. They're not even in the same system, right? Some of them are excretory and some are reproductive. So, you know, if you think about the pathway of the urine, right, you've got the bladder, then you've got, I'm sorry, let's go all the way back, the kidneys, right? You've got the kidneys, you've got the ureters, right, which are those tubes you saw next to the kidneys in the pig. Those go to the bladder, okay? And then the urethra is the one that goes from the bladder out to the urethra opening and out of the body, okay? In the pig, we would say the urogenital opening. In the human, we tend to use the term urethral opening. So the uterus has nothing to do with any of those. The uterus is the reproductive one. So that's where you've got the fallopian tubes going to the uterus. The uterus, of course, being where an embryo and a fetus would develop, right, where implantation would occur and the baby would develop. So completely different. So be really careful that you don't mix those up, like practice in your mind. I don't actually have a good memory trick for those. Sometimes I do. I've never heard a good one. If somebody has one, let me know. But ureter is the first one, kidney to bladder, urethra, bladder to the outside, uterus, reproductive. Let's see. So Sudip, I don't know if that's... I don't know if it's the same as Sachin or what. What is the function, if it's not, hello, of the medulla and the cortex? Those are just different parts of the kidney. The terms actually don't have anything to do with their function. In physiology, I should say in anatomy, medulla is the middle, kind of like it sounds. Cortex is the outside. So in our brains, for example, we have the cerebral cortex around the outside. So the terms medulla and cortex and the kidney have more to do with where they are. The nephrons actually go across both of them. There's different parts of the nephrons doing different things, but again, that's way beyond the level that we need for freshman biology, right? Take it easy. Oh, hi, Yash. How does the immune system store the information of the pathogens? Excellent question. I didn't mention that a lot, but in a way that actually is kind of easy to remember. They're called memory cells, right? Which is kind of a nice way to think about it. So the idea is that when you have a specific immune response, remember how I've said that you can make all different kinds of antibodies depending on the type of antigen. So the way that that works is when a pathogen comes in your body, you have special cells that say, hey, this is a bad guy, we need to identify this and fight it. And they actually grab a piece of the antigen, put it on their own cell membrane, kind of like up on my head here, right? They go back to places like the spleen and they say, okay, let's find a white blood cell that can match this, right? And those white blood cells are identified and they start to make more of themselves. They start to make antibodies that match this antigen, right? And then that, of course, takes a few days. That's the primary immune response. And then they pour out into the blood, okay? And they pour out matching T cells and matching B and matching antibodies, and they attack all these pathogens that match. All of that happens for a little while. Like you could have an immune response for several days or a week or two. And when all of that passes, and it does, your body eventually breaks down most of the cells and the antibodies, but it keeps a few memory cells with that matching piece, right? And that way, later on, when you have a secondary immune response, you don't have to go through the whole process of like finding the right one. You've already got some of these memory cells floating around. And very quickly, you can start that secondary immune response, and it's very powerful. Okay, but literally you keep some of these memory cells. They're called memory B cells, memory T cells, right? And they stay in your body for the rest of your life. Hi, Sophia. Do we have to know the specific parts of the kidney, like the medulla and the cortex? So that's come up several times. No, you do not. Basic kidney function is sufficient. Okay. Diksha. Ooh, hold on, I just lost your note. Diksha, what biomolecules do the lacteals and the capillaries absorb? Yeah, so the division there has to do with whether it's water soluble or fat soluble. So things that are water soluble can go into your blood, meaning your capillaries, right? Which is a lot of things we're familiar with. So that could be like, glucose, amino acids, things like that that can easily move in water. Things that are fat soluble would be specifically, of course, fatty acids, right? But there's like some fat soluble vitamins, like vitamin D, vitamin A are both fat soluble, and they would end up actually going into the lacteals as well. Okay, so the division is whether it's water soluble or fat soluble. And don't forget that the lacteals are very small lymphatic vessels, kind of like lymphatic capillaries. Sathvika is asking, hi Sathvika, do lymphatic organs filter the blood? Not directly, but there's a lot of interconnections between the lymphatic system and your circulatory system. So lymphatic vessels go to the spleen, so do blood vessels, right? So it's not specifically the lymphoid organ's job to filter the blood. That's what the kidney does. But I'm not saying there's no interaction. Like something might happen with the blood as it goes to the lymphatic organs. I don't actually know that very well. We think more in terms of it filtering the lymph, which it does. But there's going to be some interaction between the lymph and the blood in various parts of the body. Sophia, does the vas deferens have a specific function, or is it just a passageway? Mostly just a passageway, less of a function than the epididymis. It's kind of a pretty long tube. It's sort of funny because I was teaching reproductive system and physiology today, and I gave them the little factoid that the vas deferens is actually 18 inches long in humans, which is kind of crazy, right? So I think that's both sides. So 9 inches, but that's still pretty long, right? So there's this fairly long distance because in males, remember, the testes were originally in the abdomen and descended down. So you have these long tubes that have to sort of go up and down from the abdomen and then back up to go through the penis. So it's this, kind of very long system of tubes. So the vas deferens is this long tube that goes between the epididymis and the urethra at the base of the penis, right? So it's a fairly long tube. There are other tubes that join in that provide the liquid and the substances of the semen. So you've got the sperm coming from the epididymis. You've got these other organs putting fluid into the vas deferens, and it all joins together right at the moment of ejaculation so that the semen comes out as a mixture. Let's see. I'll take a little sip of water here. Hi, Elena. I haven't seen you yet. Is the umbilical cord part of the integumentary or the circulatory system? I would say the umbilical cord. That might be integumentary. Integumentary is one of these systems that we don't talk about it a lot. It's supposed to be connective tissue, the skin, things that sort of connect things and cover things. Again, it's a little bit of a catch-all system. So I guess if I had to put the umbilical cord in a system, that's reasonable. But circulatory is not unreasonable either. It holds blood vessels, right? So again, it's one of those ones that's a bit hard to categorize. Certainly, however, the umbilical vein and the umbilical artery are in the circulatory because they are blood vessels. That's all they are, blood vessels. Okay? Sham, does the liver break down hormones? I believe it does sometimes, yes, and I believe the kidney does sometimes as well, unless the kidney just clears them. That's a little foggy in my head. I need to look that up. But the liver can do many things and breaks down a lot. So yes, hormones do need to be cleared from your body pretty regularly, or they would keep being active. And the only way to control things is to sort of, send them out at a specific time, say when something is too high or too low. But as that thing comes back into balance, into stability, you'd have to get rid of the hormone, right, in order to keep it from getting too low. So you're constantly clearing these proteins out of your blood, and your liver is certainly one of the places that does that. And at some point, thank you, Pinky, at some point your kidneys are able to also excrete proteins, and they do excrete hormones into your urine as well, because you can actually detect hormones in the urine. That's a whole other interesting thing. Pinky's showing off his butt here. Kitty butt, kitty butt. Okay, maybe you can sit on my lap or something. Raghu, can white blood cells develop in any lymphatic organ? No. There's very specific places where they go. And remember, they're named for that. The T cells are named because they go to the thymus. The B cells mostly develop in the bone marrow. And so, but then they go to the spleen, right? So there's names for that. But no, like if you think about the fact that, like, for example, the appendix is a lymphoid organ, as far as I know, there aren't white blood cells developing there. They do live there, right, and have function. But in terms of like the initial development, I don't believe that happens there. Pallavi. Hi, Pallavi. To clarify, do the spleen and the liver both break down red blood cells and recycle iron, or is it one or the other? To my knowledge, it's both. I don't know if one does more than the other or something like that. For our purposes, they both help in some way. Raghu, do we need to know the valves in the heart? Nah, I haven't been including that. It's one of those, I know it's hard for you guys to believe, but I actually keep cutting out content every year to make the course a little bit less, a little bit less content. So I cut out the valves a couple of years ago. So if you want to know them, that's fine. And especially if you go on in biology, you're going to need to know them. So that's great. It's kind of fun to know them. But I'm not going to test you on them. Okay? He is asking about the function of the lungs, and that's a bit of a broad question, but the sort of main thing that we would focus on would be gas exchange, right? The fact that it is the place where these little bubbles, these little air sacs, where the air goes when you breathe, fills up a little bubble, right? Just like blowing up a balloon, except that the sides are very thin and the capillaries are right next to it, and so literally individual molecules can diffuse across, okay? Most importantly, oxygen diffusing from the air you're breathing into the blood of your capillary, binding to the hemoglobin within the red blood cells of your blood. Okay, at the same time, carbon dioxide diffusing from your blood in the capillaries into these little air sacs so that the next time you inhale, the carbon dioxide will go out. Okay? There's more than that, of course. You can have other chemicals diffusing. You can have infections and all that, but that's the basic function. And yes, you most definitely need to know the chambers of the heart. Okay, so be really comfortable. There's going to be several questions that relate to the flow of blood because you could identify several parts of the heart, right? And many of those questions are going to say, what kind of blood is this? Where does it go? Right? So be very comfortable starting from anywhere in the heart and being able to describe the blood flow. Okay, super important. Siri, if there is a pin on the coronary artery, do we identify it as the coronary artery or the heart? You would identify it as the coronary artery. And rest assured, you guys, it's going to be easier than you think. We've very carefully phrased the question, so you're going to know what to answer, right? We're going to say, like, what vessel is this, right? Or something that makes it really clear, as opposed to what organ is this. Okay, so generally speaking, as best as possible, we're going to make that very clear to you. And if for some reason during the practical you're not sure, you can always ask. But I think you'll find it's actually pretty clear. Okay, we've thought through like what we're asking to make sure that you're not going to get confused during the practical. Are oviducts just another name for the fallopian tubes? Yes, there's a bunch of these terms that have multiple names. Sometimes one is more common among sort of regular people. So the fallopian tubes are sometimes called, I want to say, the uterine tubes. The oviducts are sometimes the fallopian tubes. Did I get that right? I think I did. The vas deferens is sometimes called the ductus deferens. So there's a number of alternative names. Just to keep it simple, it's fine to just use the ones that we're using in class, okay? Here, do we have to identify the ureter and the uterus in the male and female pig, and where is it located? Okay, so the uterus, of course, is only going to be in the female pig because that's a female reproductive part. Males and females both have ureters and both have urethras, okay? The ureter is pretty much the same in males and females. It's going to be that white tube coming out of the kidney. It's really no different. The urethra, of course, is very different, right? You learn to identify it in the female pigs as the top tube, UVR, right? So that top white tube in the pelvis is the urethra, right, going to the urogenital opening. In males, it's inside of the penis. You cannot see it separately, okay? So we're not going to ask you to identify the urethra in a male. within the penis. Now, there may be a question that talks about it, and again, as I mentioned during class, be sort of thoughtful. Would urethra or penis be a better response depending on how the question is phrased? Right? Penis being sort of the entire structure, urethra is more like the tube that things are flowing through. Okay? So you can kind of use that to sort of manage what you would say. I think it's Viha. It's a guest. Thank you for coming. What is a good way to differentiate the peritoneum and the mesentery? Interesting question. So for our purposes, these terms are actually used a little bit more widely than we're using them with the pig. But for purposes of the pig, the peritoneum was the initial membrane that sort of covered the abdominal area, right? It came up again actually during when we were talking about dialysis. And we talked about peritoneal dialysis and how you could go into this area in the abdomen. Because the abdominal cavity, there's kind of like a bunch of organs and some space, right? In your abdominal cavity. Like it's soft in there, right? So you kind of have some space. So there's this sort of sheet of membrane over it that sort of kind of keeps everything a little bit snug so it's not bouncing around, moving around too much. And that was part of what we cut through in the dissection, right? So when I think of peritoneum related to the dissection, it's that whole sheet over the entire abdominal area. Sometimes it's used more broadly in other parts of the body as well. The mesentery, particularly we use to talk about that little sort of fan shape. If I don't have something to draw on right now, but if I sort of opened up a little piece of small intestine, and there would be this sort of fan-looking shape where it was sort of a thin, almost transparent sheet with little lines like this, that's the mesentery. The little lines represent the capillaries. They probably are actually multiple capillaries because capillaries are, very tiny. And it's also sort of holding the small intestine to the base. So there's sort of a tight base and all the small intestine is sort of clustered around that. So the mesentery is holding it to this base because you don't want the small intestine moving around too much because literally it could get kinked up around itself, like kind of knotted up. And if that happened, you can imagine you could have a blockage. That would be really, really bad. So the mesentery sort of keeps it from kinking up. It provides a sort of structure that these capillaries can flow through and then holds it to the base. Okay, so it's providing a number of functions. Let's see here. Aditi is asking about the difference between acute and chronic bronchitis. So in general, acute means more sudden. In practice, it often means more severe, but not always, okay? Chronic tends to mean that it's over a period of time. Sometimes it takes a long time to develop. Sometimes it occurs over a long time. Like you could have a chronic illness for your entire life, okay? But chronic illnesses, of course, can be quite severe as well. If you think particularly about chronic renal failure, that's still deadly, right? For acute and chronic bronchitis, acute is what you get like when you've had a bad cold and then you get a bacterial infection in your bronchial tubes. So it's not going to last forever. It happens kind of suddenly. Usually it lasts for a couple weeks, right? And then it's over. Chronic bronchitis means that for some reason, often smoking, sometimes air pollution, various other things, vaping, of course, that you will have this constant mucus production and difficulty getting the mucus out of your bronchial tubes, so that therefore you're constantly coughing and having this thick mucus. It's not necessarily an infection, although you're more likely to get an infection. So that's a chronic form of bronchitis. Okay, it goes on over a long time. Raghu, I'm going to go past yours because I already talked about the peritoneum. Difference between the bronchial tubes and the bronchioles. Bronchiole is a more technical term. So OLES means smaller. Okay, so the bronchi, the bronchus is like the big tube that comes down from your trachea. The bronchi is plural. Bronchus is singular. Bronchi are the two big tubes that go to either major part of your lungs. And then that splits into a bunch of little tubes, and those are called the bronchioles. Okay, similarly, big arteries branch into arterioles. Veins branch into venules. venules. Okay? Bronchial tubes is kind of a vague term. It's a more common usage. Like if you saw a commercial about asthma, they would talk about the bronchial tubes, right? I think it's going to refer to the smaller bronchioles that are actually in your lungs, but it's a little bit less technical or precise kind of term. Vikram, the only job of hemoglobin to hold oxygen. Yeah, I would say so. I believe, and I'm kind of going back several years in my memory here, I believe that actually some carbon dioxide might get held too, but I don't want to confuse you guys with that. There's a little bit of complicated stuff that goes on there. for our purposes, that is by far its primary job. The idea is if I had, this much blood, right, I could dissolve a certain amount of oxygen in there, like I can with water that's like in the ocean, right? There's like a tiny bit of oxygen that could dissolve in that amount of liquid. It's not very much. It's not enough to feed our cells, right? So hemoglobin is really an evolutionary adaptation that now in that amount of blood, it's like half red blood cells. And each of those red blood cells is filled with literally hundreds of thousands of hemoglobin molecules. Each one can bind to oxygen. So now in the same amount of blood, I've got, millions and cajillions of molecules of oxygen instead of just a few dissolved in the liquid. Okay, so it's really a wonderful adaptation for allowing our blood to carry a tremendous amount more oxygen. Okay, and that's really the purpose of it. Aditi, what is the difference between the mesentery and the villi? Oh, the villi are in a different place. So the villi are inside of the small intestine. The mesentery is technically outside. So, if this hand, I guess I do need to draw sometimes, right? But let's say that this hand is my small intestine, okay? And the mesentery is underneath, right? The mesentery is down here. The villi would actually be, inside of my arm, okay? So as the chyme is flowing through, now let's have this be the small intestine here. Here are the villi, so that liquidy chyme is sort of washing past, right? And it's just lots of surface area for those molecules to diffuse, okay? So the function there is to provide all this additional surface area. And if you go back to the pictures in the digestive system PowerPoint, it will show you how there are cells lining these villi with their little hairs and their microvilli and all that, right? But the idea is, again, lots of surface area where molecules from the chyme can diffuse into the villi. And then inside these villi are capillaries, which eventually go to the capillaries in the mesentery. Okay, but they're actually located in two different places. Villi are around maximizing surface area for absorption. The mesentery is, again, this kind of structural piece. Okay. There's a question here about lacteals and capillaries. I actually already covered that one earlier, so just the 5-second version. Capillaries, water-soluble biomolecules, lacteals, fat-soluble. Okay. Is mesentery part of digestive and circulatory? Yes, again, it's one of those ones that's very hard to categorize. Some people consider it integumentary because it's a connective tissue, right? But it contains blood vessels, which are circulatory, right? It helps with digestion. Again, I'm just not going to get worked up about that in terms of, it's not that they're wrong, but what I would say is for purposes of the practical, make your function match your system. I probably wouldn't say integumentary because that's pretty hard to explain, right? So, focus on making it the most obvious connection you can so you can sort of remember the function related to the system. Hi, Aya. Yes, my cats come in and out of the video sometimes. Be Jesus. Oh, that's kind of a fun one. Okay, what is the meaning of life? Wow, that would take me a lot longer than this presentation to answer that, but it is a very interesting question, and I hope we can discuss that at another time. Okay, I think to live it. Frank, which system is the pericardium in? Let's see. And I just messed up my live stream again. Hold on. Let me just find where I was. Pericardium, again, same thing. It's technically a membrane, so it's kind of like integumentary, but again, we don't even bother with that term hardly in this class. So it's fine to say circulatory. It helps support the heart, right? That's fine. Satvika, and just honestly, you guys, I'm probably not going to ask you questions like that, right? Because it's just not really what I want you to know. I want you to be thinking in terms of how these more major parts work, okay? So, hint, hint, I will probably not ask you the system that the pericardium's in, okay? That's just too obscure. Satvika, do lymphatic organs filter pathogens out of the lymph? Yes, they can. Or do they just release the appropriate white blood cells? No, my understanding is they can actually filter them out as they're flowing through the lymph. Then there are probably white blood cells that actually, attack them, okay? Do we have to know flow through the valves? Again, I'm not going to test on specific names of the valves, but definitely know the chambers and the vessels. That answers your question, Diksha. Thank you, Ridvik. How do you differentiate the thymus tissue from the pericardium? To me, it looks completely different. The pericardium completely surrounds the heart. It's sort of an opaque white membrane, right? Like a tough white membrane. Whitish, mostly hard to see through. The thymus that's on top of the heart, doesn't look the same way at all. It's kind of a pinky color. Sounds like my cat, pink. But it's sort of thick and spongy looking, right? And it's more like a little triangle that just sits over the top part of the heart. So it looks very different. It doesn't cover the same place. In most of the pigs now, it's quite hard to see because we've pushed the pericardium up. So it's going to be a lot easier to identify the thymus in the throat area than it is over the heart at this point, simply because we've moved it out of the way. Is there cilia on the trachea? Yes. That's really important because you need to have a system in your trachea that keeps particles, whatever, from getting down into the lungs. Because the lungs are, unlike, your digestive system, the lungs are, the digestive system, things can just go all the way through if they're waste or something. There's no way for them to go in your lungs. It dead ends. So, and your lungs are delicate. You need to preserve those alveoli, right? So the trachea, one of its functions, it doesn't just sit there being an airway. Inside of the trachea are teeny tiny little hairs, the cilia. There's cells, living cells, right, that can secrete mucus so that as air is passing through, if there are particulates in the air, and particulates is just a word for, particles that are bigger than air, like soot, more solid, right? Particles in cigarette smoke, etc. That those would get stuck in this mucus, and then the cilia is sort of constantly doing the wave in the upwards direction, right? And it's moving that mucus up till it gets to your pharynx, at which point you can swallow it, you never notice it, or if there's a big old chunk, you might spit it out, right? Do it the polite way. Sham, if dialysis only needs to occur 3 times a week, does the kidney only filter in segments or constantly? No, your kidney works 24/7. That's why dialysis isn't as good. Okay? Some people do go like 4 times a week, but yeah, it's not nearly as good. So a lot of fluid builds up in between dialysis treatments. The toxins build up. People don't feel so good. So the kidney's a lot better. It's very hard for us to imitate the 24/7 function of your organs. Even if you think of somebody, for example, who's diabetic, right? What they do is they inject insulin several times a day, but your pancreas is monitoring it all the time, raising the insulin and lowering the insulin just a little bit, just maintaining this really good blood control. Much harder to do that from the outside when you're just doing it several times a day. So that's a real downside of dialysis, but we don't have anything else that we can do, right, for people short of kidney transplant. Let's see. Sophia, when looking at a pig's heart, how do we differentiate between the pulmonary arteries, aorta, and vena cava? Position and appearance. Okay? So when you're looking at the heart, okay, remember I always do this thing, right? So when you're looking at the heart, the one that's diagonal, coming from the right ventricle, from the right, pointing towards the right ventricle, big fat white one on top, pulmonary artery. The one going more vertically, underneath it, that if you went straight down, would be heading towards the left ventricle, aorta. They're both fat white because they're arteries, right? They're both coming out right around the top of the heart. Next to that, on the right-hand side, okay, is a much different looking vessel. It's about as wide, but it's flat and kind of wrinkly and more dark pink, okay, and that's the vena cava. And you can see it above the heart, the superior, and below the heart going towards the liver, the inferior vena cava. But it's got that flattened, thinner look that veins have compared to arteries, right? Because the difference in the walls. Paula V, is there going to be any questions on various diseases? A little bit. It's not like the main focus, but there are a few that touch on disorders related to some of the systems. But it's I would say, I don't have the whole thing memorized, but I would say it's primarily healthy function, right? Like what happens here and sort of how it's supposed to function. I think there might be a couple few references to disorders, but it's not the primary focus. There's much more about disorders on the written tests that you take than there is on the practical. Okay, so let's see. Is there going to be any question? We got that one. Raghu. Are these correct systems? Pericardium, circulatory, mesentery, digestive, kidney, excretory, anus, digestive, umbilical vein, circulatory. Yes, those are all fine. Sathika. Is the penis just smooth muscle holding the urethra? No. The penis has a lot of function related to actually being able to have intercourse, right? So the urethra is this tiny tube. Most of the penis is actually this sort of spongy tissue that has blood vessels in it, and the blood can leak out of the blood vessels and go into this sort of spongy tissue and fill it up, and that's what causes an erection in males. Okay, so there's a lot of space in there, right? And when there's no blood in there, it sort of shrinks down and becomes what we call flaccid or soft, right? But the urethra is still there, obviously. But when a man has an erection, the blood will flow in, right? The blood vessels will dilate because the muscles relax around those blood vessels, and all this tissue fills up with blood, causing the erection. Okay, so a lot of the penis is around being a structure that can have an erection, and therefore be used for intercourse, and therefore deliver the semen inside of the vagina. Okay, so obviously that function is really important as well. Vikram is asking, what do the aortas split into? Okay, I'm going to clarify your language a little bit. There's only one aorta, right? It is the aorta. It is the biggest artery in your body. Okay, so there are many branches of the aorta. Okay, so if you look at a picture, the aorta comes sort of straight out of the heart and immediately sort of makes this big U-turn. It's called the aortic arch, right? And it comes down as the descending aorta. But meanwhile, all kinds of branches are coming off, right? You've got the big branches coming off the top that go to your carotid arteries, carrying blood to your brain. You've got a little branch that comes off and goes to the coronary arteries, right? You've got branches that go to your arms, your internal organs, your legs. There's a whole bunch of branches that come off because this is like the main highway, right, with all kinds of exits. I think that answers your question. Victor's asking about the auricles. Are the auricles just the atria, and will the auricles be in the practical? Okay, so no, they are not the atria at all. They adjoin the atria. And I wish I had time to show you a bigger heart, because if you see a bigger heart, what you'll see is that if you could stick your finger into the atria, and we actually do this in the big hearts of physiology, if you could stick your finger into the atria, there'd be an opening and you could stick it into the auricle, right? And into the vena cava, right? So the idea is if there's a lot of blood flowing through the vena cava, say that you're exercising, those auricles, they're kind of wrinkly as you saw, they're sort of like an expandable suitcase. Okay, a lot of the times they're just sitting there flat if you're relaxing, but if you're exercising, you have a lot of blood flow, the atria themselves are tiny, teeny tiny. So when you're relaxed, blood just sort of can flow through them, and it's not a big deal. But if you're exercising and there's a lot of blood flow, there's an opening into the auricle, and the auricle can poof out and just hold like a bunch more blood, just very briefly as the atria are contracting. So it's just extra capacity, extra filling space for the atria. Okay, so they technically are a different structure. I don't believe they're on the practical. I don't think they are. Okay, but everybody sees them, and so we identify them. But that's their function. Jack Koff, I don't know you, but welcome. He says, can you give us an example question? So what I mentioned earlier in the recording is that it's going to be very similar to what we do in the orals, right? Identify system function. The two others that are most common would be like what's flowing through this, right? Because many of them have liquids or materials inside. If there is something flowing through it might ask you what it does. Is something secreted? Where does it go from here, right? So it's going to be those kinds of questions. They really are pretty straightforward. There's not like complex questions like on a multiple choice. Okay, they're fairly straightforward things that you could answer with a short phrase or even sometimes a word. He is asking, where is the uterus located in a female pig? In the pigs, it is quite hard to see. It's sort of buried under the bladder, okay? And the only way that I can see it is if I take those delicate little fallopian tubes and I sort of pull them towards the pig's head from the bladder, and then you see this teeny tiny, like less than a quarter-inch little sort of white area. And it's mostly sort of buried under the bladder, and that's the little tiny uterus, right? I will tell you right now, we are not going to ask you to identify that. It's too hard to identify. It's just too small and too inconspicuous, okay? Hard to see. So don't worry about identifying it, but you do need to be able to understand where it fits into the pathway of the reproductive system, right? That ovary, fallopian tubes, uterus, cervix, vagina, out, right? So that's the level that you need to know for that. Okay, I'm going to skip the one about the auricles function, because I've answered that. Where's the atrium located? There are two atria, that's the plural, and they're the upper chambers, right? So again, they're quite small. They're kind of right where those auricles are. Most of the heart, like 80% of the heart that you see is actually ventricles. Siri retracted one. Siri's helping you out, thank you. I won't guarantee you don't have to identify it. There may be pins on the outside of the heart where you would identify atria or ventricles. We didn't open the heart in our class. Some of the classes did. It's honestly not super impressive on the inside because it's so small, but you can see the openings a little bit and the septum and stuff. Rufik's asking about bronchitis. Depends if you're talking about acute or chronic. There's actually some nice lists on the respiratory PowerPoint. Briefly, acute is going to usually be infection. Chronic is usually going to be pollution of some sort, whether it's smoking or air pollution. Anusha, will spelling count? Yes. So for most of the questions, there's a lot of questions on the practical where you can get half credit. And sometimes it's because you didn't match up the system and the function, or your description was partially correct, and sometimes it's for spelling, right? So if it's the right term, but it's spelled incorrectly, it'll be half credit, okay? The good news is that you can almost always get at least partial credit, right? So just, say what you know, but don't go on and on, okay? Safak is asking, is bronchitis inflammation or excess mucus production? I would say most of the time those two go together. If you think about what inflammation is, remember how we talked about inflammation as being like all this like lymphatic fluid that flows out and white blood cells? That can happen in your bronchial tubes as well. So you get extra fluid and mucus, and that's partly what you're coughing up. Okay, so there's a little bit of each going on there. He is complimenting my kitty. Thank you. They've given up on me now. They went away somewhere. It was too boring. Neil is asking, what is the function of the urogenital papilla? We looked that up in the past. The best we could do is find something about that it might be related to actually like reproduction for pigs, right? Like I think somebody told me, I don't know where we got this years ago, that it releases pheromones or something to attract the other pigs. I don't actually know if that's true. I've never really watched pigs mate. I think it's equivalent to sort of the external genitals on a human female, but I don't even actually know what the little sort of part sticking out, the little sort of nipply looking part does. I have no idea. If anybody knows about pigs, sure, let me know. But honestly, that's not a question I would ever ask you. And thanks for clarifying your spelling. Raghu, can you list two systems for organs that have more than one system? If you explain the organ's function for both of the functions you list. Oh, are you asking you? I thought you were asking me to do it. I think you mean on the practical. Honestly, just do one. And the question, unless it asks you for more, but typically the questions will just ask you for a system. And then you describe a function that matches that system, right? Don't overdo. Frankly, your time is somewhat limited, and I think if you're rushing to do too much, you're more likely to have errors or have an incomplete answer. So don't try to do more. If it just asks you for one system, just put one system. That's okay. I mean, answer the question, but you don't need to go crazy. You guys probably know more than you need to put on the practical, honestly, right? So you want to be specific enough that you show you understand, but you don't need to write an essay. You're going to have a space that's not very big, and you're going to have a limited amount of time. Okay? So practice these explanations, like pretty kind of short and to the point. No, you don't have to explain why the organ is part of the system. You can just explain the function. You just want the two to match. A student is asking how filtration and reabsorption work, although it says filtration, which is kind of cute. Let me give you like the 10-second explanation, but I'll also tell you don't need to know that for the practical. Okay? So filtration is basically dumping everything from the blood that's less than a certain size into the filtrate of the nephron. Right? I use the analogy of a sort of a net, and everything that can fit through the holes in the net, including all the watery stuff and small molecules, but not the cells, goes into the filtrate. Reabsorption, that's passive. Reabsorption is when your kidneys and sort of purposefully take certain things back. Water, nutrients, salts, whatever it needs to take back, and that's under the kidney's control. Okay, so by back, I mean from the nephron into the capillary. My students hopefully have nice side-by-side drawings of that. If that would help you to understand, you might want to ask one of them to see that drawing. I hope they have that drawing. Okay, a student named Megana, which I hope I'm not mispronouncing. I apologize if I am. Is the only function of the ureter to expel urine from the kidney? As far as I know, yeah, it's a tube. You have lots of tubes that do just transport things. So yeah, in that case, I can't think of another function that it has. Yeah, it just transport urine from the kidney to the urinary bladder. Be Jesus. Hi, I'm your student from a long time ago, Lenny Small. Remember, your class really helped me with my college major. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for returning. I appreciate that. Just out of curiosity, what's your college and what's your major? That sounds awesome. Thank you for checking in on us. And I'm just out of curiosity. I'd be happy to know like how you heard about this. Maybe you know a student who's at Monte Vista right now. Elena Kahn, what does pancreatic juice do? Pancreatic juice is the term for all the fluid that comes out of the pancreas and goes to the small intestine. So it includes a lot of different things with different functions, right? The main ones we learned about is sort of a whole group of enzymes that collectively their function is to digest the biomolecules that are in your chyme. And then you've got the sodium bicarbonate, right, that we talked about in terms of neutralizing the chyme itself, really. At this point, the acid is all mixed in with the chyme, so the chyme is acidic. So that liquid runs into the pancreatic juice liquid, and as soon as they run into each other, the pH gets kind of neutralized, which is really important because this liquid contains regular enzymes that would be denatured by this liquid, right? So as they run into each other, you get this sort of very rapid neutralization so that the enzymes in the pancreatic juice don't get denatured. Okay, people get all hung up on damaging the small intestine. There isn't even really time for that, right? But denaturing happens very quickly, so that's really the concern. When one kidney is removed, does that mean that 2 renal arteries lead to 1 kidney and 2 renal veins eat out? I don't believe so. I've never heard of that. That would be, I think, far too complicated to have blood vessels going across the body, and I don't think that would help. I think it would be too much blood for 1 kidney. I don't believe that's how it happens at all. I think they probably just close off those blood vessels. I'm not a surgeon, I don't know exactly, but my guess is probably that they just simply close off those blood vessels where they've removed the kidney so that the blood just circulates around the body, goes back to the heart, and never goes to a kidney, right? Remember that it's not like all blood circulates through the kidney like this. It doesn't work that way, right? So blood goes from your heart, out, back, out, back. So at any given time, a little bit of your blood goes to the kidneys, right? And then it gets mixed in with all the other blood that didn't go to your kidneys. And then it gets sent back out, and some more blood goes to your kidneys. It just has to keep your blood clean enough over time, right? It's not, it's not like a perfect little loop or something. Okay, so yes, you've only got 1 kidney doing that work as the blood's going back and forth. So it's going to clean it a little bit less blood at a time, I guess I would say, so a little bit slower rate. But remember that you can go until about 90% loss of function in your kidneys before you're at renal failure. So you have a tremendous amount of redundancy in terms of your ability to filter the blood with relatively fewer nephrons. Victor's asking, is infection of the alveoli classified as pneumonia? Yes. And there are different types, viral, bacterial, etc. Thank you, Ridvik. Do we need to know hyperthyroidism and hypo? I would know that. Again, I actually didn't look at the questions today as I was setting up the practical. I don't remember all of them. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, I think you might need to know that. So, use word roots. Hyper, too much. Hypo, too little, right? Related to the thyroxine. I don't want to talk about that right now, but I will bring this up next week to you guys, this annoying thing that's happening in the chat. David's asking, do we say sperm and urine come out from the urethra or the penis? They travel through the urethra, right? They exit through the urogenital opening, which in humans we typically just say through the head of the penis, right? So, when you're a person, you think about there being a penis because you can't see the urethra, right? But if the question is posed like, what tube does it go through or something like that, then the urethra would be the more likely answer, right? So the way you phrased it, come out of, actually I would still use either one of those, could potentially work. Use context. I think it will be clear to you in context which is the better term on the practical. Hold on, I just lost a bunch of, I'm going to find my place again. The sperm is called semen after it comes out, and that confused me. Yes, so you can clarify for your friends. Sperm and semen are not the same thing. Sperm is literally just the sperm cells. Semen is all the fluid that they are combined with. So when it comes out, it is semen. Semen includes sperm. Okay, so semen is a combination of a bunch of things in the liquid with the sperm cells. okay? When it comes out, it's semen, and they are one fluid, okay? What system is the pericardium in? I covered that earlier around the idea of it being sort of integumentary and circulatory, but I won't ask you. How do you tell the difference between the urinary and the pulmonary artery? I went over that briefly before, so, okay, diagonal on top, pulmonary artery, straight up and down, underneath, aorta. Hormones from the ovaries. The ones that you know about, there's a lot of complexity of the female hormones, but the ones that are in the ovaries that you guys know about are going to be estrogen and progesterone, okay? And those fluctuate at different times during the menstrual cycle. Different tissues and organs are made of muscle, epithelial, and connective tissue. Nah, that's beyond the scope. A question about what exactly is bronchitis. I went over before the difference between acute and chronic. In general, when you see itis on something, it generally means inflammation, or kind of sometimes just means something's wrong with it. It can be just inflammation, or it could be an actual infection. It's going to depend what type it is. So bronchitis is used to describe a bunch of different types of things. And there is a good description of that, again, in the respiratory PowerPoint. Neil's asking, what is the format of the practical? I've kind of been going over that a bunch, so I don't want to rehash all of that. But, just remember you're going to be writing things out, and the pins will be in the pigs already with questions on the tables waiting for you. Okay, Ms. Lerner, thank you for clarifying, Paula V. I knew that Lenny Small was not a student of mine, but in case I forgot, I didn't want to be insulting. I forgot that was in Mice and Men. I always think of that, actually, when I hear the term Lenny, but I forgot his last name was Small. So thank you for clarifying that. But if it is a former student, anyway, hello anyway. If not, then haha, I guess. I don't know if it was that funny, but okay. Frank Liu, do we need to know what happens in the placenta? Hi, Frank. I don't actually remember how much detail there is on the practical. You do need to know about the placenta for the practical in general, okay? It's particularly related to the transport of blood. There's not a lot of detail in terms of the villi and that sort of thing. That's the kind of detail that would more be on a written test. I don't think there's a ton of that on the practical. Do you need to know what enzyme's name in the pancreatic juice? Hi, Kevin. I like your little wolf icon, dog icon. Enzymes name. Oh, there's a ton of enzymes, Kevin. Sorry, I lost track of your question there. And they come in categories. There's lipases. There's actually, there's amylase. There's a bunch of them. There's actually a bunch of enzymes, too, that are released from the intestinal walls. So by the time you get to the small intestine, there's just like a ton of enzymes. I know some of them, but you don't need to know that many of them. But a lot of them are like lipase and amylase and peptidases, things like that. Another piping in from our budding medical student here. Going to be a human dissector, aka a surgeon. Cool. Well, yeah, that's what happens. If you go to med school, you get to cut up humans. Interesting stuff. Esophagus, is the blood in the pulmonary artery deoxygenated and nutrient poor, just like the blood in the umbilical arteries? More or less. It's certainly deoxygenated, and in reality, of course, this is a scale. We're not talking zero oxygen, right? It means relatively deoxygenated compared to right after it goes to the lungs. But it's going to have less oxygen. I would say, given that it's already gone to your capillaries and come back, it's about as deoxygenated as it's going to get in your body when it's in the pulmonary artery. Same with the umbilical arteries. It's already traveled throughout the fetus. So it's going to be pretty, actually, fetus blood flow, oxygen deoxygenated, is different. We didn't study that in this class a lot, but it's more complex. The blood is somewhat more mixed than it is in humans. So I don't want to get into the details of that because it's not necessary. To simplify your question, in general, yes, they both contain deoxygenated blood. It's probably not exactly the same. And generally speaking, I'd say yes, somewhat relatively nutrient poor. Hi, Patricia. Thank you. I love my kitty too. I have the Penny, the little girl Calico's back on my lap, which is nice. She likes to be on my lap. The function that the mesentery holds the small intestine to a base and keeps it from moving around. Yeah, I'd say that's kind of integumentary. In actual seriousness, we don't always have to be in seriousness, but thank you. The umbilical arteries are on the sides of the bladder, correct? Yes, in the pig. I haven't actually seen a good picture of it in human fetuses? That's an interesting question. Maybe that's something you could look up. So my image is of the pig, where the bladder is kind of long and skinny and the umbilical arteries are almost like stuck to the side of it. Actually, there's kind of a little membrane that holds them onto the side of it. I don't know if it's exactly the same in humans, because human bladders are not so long and skinny as they are in the pig. They're more round. So I'm not quite sure if the umbilical arteries are sort of to the right on the sides of the bladder in human fetuses as they are in the pig. Mostly I've seen pictures of pig fetuses, so I don't have as much anatomical knowledge of the human fetuses. I don't understand the anatomy of the reproductive systems. If you have a more, and first of all, keep in mind that neither the umbilical artery nor the bladder is part of the reproductive system, right? Umbilical artery is a fetal structure. We call it part of fetal circulation. And if you have a specific question about the reproductive system, I can try to answer that. The pastel kitty is named Penny, and the one that kept walking by and showing you his butt, his name is Pinky. They're brother and sister. Let's see. Can atherosclerosis happen in veins? Not really. It happens because of two things. It tends to get started because of high blood pressure, which is much more of an issue in arteries than veins. And also it has to do with the fat. When there's more fat in the blood, you get more of a buildup of atherosclerosis, and you're going to typically have more fat in the arteries. Because once you get to veins, remember, veins are coming back from capillaries. At that point, you've already delivered nutrients to the cells. So there's not going to be so much nutrients in venous blood. Okay, so you don't have that fat that might build up and cause plaque. Okay, so typically speaking, no, you're going to get atherosclerosis in arteries, not in veins. Now, somebody responded, our BJesus person here, that because veins do not contain muscles. That's true that veins don't have these big muscles around them. To my knowledge, that doesn't really relate specifically to the atherosclerosis part. If you know something I don't know, please chime in. A student I don't know named, ooh, that looks like such a pretty name, Naimisha? Are you related to Anusha? Maybe it's your sister, I don't know. What system is pericardium? That keeps coming up again, integumentary, circulatory, I'm not going to ask you. Jerry, hi Jerry, where exactly is lactase mixed with the chyme to break down lactose? Oh, that's going to be in the small intestine. Okay, so remember that most enzymes, pepsin's really the only one that's in the stomach. All the other enzymes are going to be happening in the small intestine. So lactase is there. Do we need to know where the esophagus is? Conceptually, but not physically. It's somewhat difficult to identify the esophagus in the pigs. As you guys saw, the only place to really point it out is if you're looking for the descending aorta, there's that other little tube, but it's quite hard to see. We won't have you identify it. But remember that things you can't see on the pig could still appear on the practical in the form of like a pathway question, right? Like, where does it go from here? So you could end up having to use the names of structures that you can't actually see on the pig. But the only things that the pins will be in are the terms that have been on your lists for identification all along. Megana, how do the urinary bladder and urethra play a role in the pathway of urine? I went through the pathway previously. Whew, I'm getting tired too. We'll go just a little longer. The pathway I went through a little bit before: kidney, ureter, bladder, urethra, outside. Once urine goes to the kidneys, then the ureter. Okay, so I'm gonna clarify this because urine doesn't go to the kidneys. The kidneys make the urine, so the urine comes out of the kidneys and goes into the ureter. So you have a bunch of tubes, collecting ducts that come out, that sort of gather up the urine from all the individual nephrons. They put it in the ureter, so the urine is coming out of the kidney. We say that the kidney produces the urine, okay? And then it's going to go into that tube, the ureter, to go to the bladder. And then it's going to go to the urethra, as I said, and out of the body. Okay, so not from the ureter out, ureter, bladder, urethra. Okay, a very strange one from Sukak, so I'm going to ignore that. I think that's a reference I don't understand. Sorry, sometimes I'm out of it. Arshia, cute little emoji. Reference to kidney stone surgery. The blood and pulmonary arteries won't be nutrient deprived, right? Because after it gets oxygenated and pumped from the left ventricle into the aorta, it has to deliver nutrients to all cells. Ooh, you might be right. Let me think about that for a second. So let's see. It's going to be getting nutrients from the digestive system in the liver, so that means it's coming through the vena cava. Vena cava, of course, is going to send it. Yeah, you're right. Nice catch, Siri. Whoo, Siri is on it. She's right, because the venous blood is newly nutriented. That's not a word, but newly nutrient filled from the at least from some of the blood that's returning from the liver. Obviously not blood. It's actually interesting, Siri, because it's kind of a mixture. Because the blood that's coming from your digestive system, yes, is chock full of nutrients. But in the vena cava, it's all mixing with blood from other parts of your body that might have already dropped off nutrients. So it's a little hard to say nutrient rich or nutrient poor because there's going to be a mixture, okay? But it's certainly going to have some nutrients in it because as that blood gets pumped through the aorta, it's going to continue to deliver nutrients. So it's not, again, your blood doesn't go in this one big round circle, right? So the levels are going to be different in different parts of the blood. But blood travels pretty fast through your body. I'm too tired to remember this, but I want to say like 45 seconds. It can go like out to your body and back to the heart. It's really fast. So after a while, those molecules do get to all your parts of your body. Frank is asking about the artery and the vein. The way to remember it is you have to think about it from the fetus's heart. These are the fetus's blood vessels. They belong to the fetus. And in any organism, the arteries go away from the heart. Arteries away. Okay? In any organism, the veins come back toward the heart. Okay? TV. Toward veins toward. So if I'm talking about the fetal pig, all of its arteries, including the umbilical artery, are going away from the heart. So that means that they're going away from the heart out of the pig to the placenta. All veins, including its own vena cava and its own umbilical vein, which empties into the vena cava, are coming toward the heart. So that means it's going to be bringing oxygen and nutrients from the placenta. Okay? So arteries away from the fetus is towards the placenta, veins towards, from the placenta towards the fetus. Okay? Sham, does the umbilical cord just hold the umbilical vein and umbilical arteries, or does it have a separate function? I mean, to physically connect the placenta to the fetus, I mean, you couldn't pull it apart. You actually have to cut the umbilical cord. So it is physically connecting those two things. I hate to say the word things, but things. Okay? And there's a nice picture. You can look up a nice picture of the umbilical vein with the umbilical arteries wrapped around it inside of the cord. It's kind of cool. Because we are not allowed to touch the pigs, how will we be able to identify the penis? So on the pigs, what we do sometimes, if something's a little hard to find, like, if it's sort of underneath something, what we would do is we would sort of pull the other thing back and we put these silver pins to show we're just using those pins to hold. So we would sort of open up and expose and put the pin like right in the middle of the thing. We're not trying to trick you. We very carefully look at each one and try to make it as clear as we possibly can. Okay, we use a good example, we try to move away the other organs, and we pin the thing that we want you to identify. Okay, so you won't have to move everything. We've already done that. That's why it's so important, by the way, and I'll emphasize this again, not to touch anything, because there's all these pins like holding it in place, and if you jostle it, sometimes you'll actually mess it up for the next person. So if it seems messed up during the practical, you're just going to raise your hand and we'll come over and check it out. Do we need to do anything about the apex of the heart? No, not specifically. It's just a term that's used for that pointy V part. It's not anything we're worried about for the practical. If the ovaries and testes both produce hormones, are they a part of the endocrine system? Yes, they are. Good question, Shannon. So they are both endocrine glands, organs, as well as being reproductive organs. Okay, this is not uncommon. The pancreas is an endocrine gland or organ, along with being a digestive organ. What is the relationship between thyroid and thymus? Nothing specific. They're just both in the endocrine system. They both produce hormones. Their function is entirely separate. Okay? So the word gland is what holds them together. They happen to both start with THY. I don't know if that's a word root that means something. Nothing jumps to mind because their functions really are quite different. So if there is a word root thing, I'm not aware of it. But otherwise, they really are just two different glands in the endocrine system. Okay. How does the esophagus get from the throat to the stomach? With the thoracic cavity in the way. How does it get past the diaphragm? Yes. Sophia, the day that we cut the diaphragm, I remember I tried to show the groups a little, and I said it'll never look like this again because the diaphragm was all tight, and there's like these sealed places where those tubes go through, or the diaphragm wouldn't be able to seal off these cavities, right? So it's sort of like there's a tube going through, but it's all sealed up around it, so there's no air holes. Okay. Once you cut it, of course, you can't see that. Maybe your group still has some pictures. I don't know. But the esophagus does have to actually go through this kind of sealed opening through the diaphragm and then past the liver to get down to the stomach. Wait, I'm messing up my stuff there. So the esophagus is going to the stomach. Yeah, no, that's correct. So over the stomach. So if this is the stomach, right, here's the liver with the diaphragm right over it. So yes, as the esophagus is going through the diaphragm to get to the stomach, it's going through this kind of sealed space so that air isn't getting up to the thoracic cavity. What tube is the filtrate located in? Filtrate is in individual nephrons. So there is a part of the nephron that has a specific name. We're not going to worry about that. If lactase is mixed in with the chyme in the small intestine, how do lactase pills work for lactose intolerance since the stomach has a low pH? Okay, excellent question. Thanks for thinking that through, Jerry. So I'm trying to think. I don't know that I know specific for lactase. In general, medications often have like a coating around it that can withstand the stomach. I don't know about the particular case of lactase because I think that I don't think it has a coating. So I'm not sure what they do to make it survive the stomach. It's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that because I think that you can grind up lactase pills. They might have some kind of a coating that allows them to survive the stomach. I would have to look that up. But it has to be, you're right, it has to be something like that because simple proteins are digested in the stomach. So when we want something to go through that's a protein, we either have to coat it or we have to inject it directly into the blood, right? That's why we inject things like insulin. So I don't know in the case of lactase. I guess I would assume it's coated, but I'm not sure. Hi, Daisy. That's a pretty name. Can you explain the parts of the kidney? So I've mentioned several times that for purposes of the practical, you don't actually need to know the parts. You just need to know the general function. So I'm going to let that one go. Scrotum and scrotal sacs. Hi, Emily. I actually did that one toward the beginning of the video too. So for purposes of time, I think I'm going to go till about 9:30. So I don't want to re-answer that. It's toward the beginning of the video. We talked about the scrotum being the outer skin part, the scrotal sacs being inside, and you could re-listen to that part if you want more explanation. Anusha is my twin. Thank you for telling me that. I think I saw that Anusha had a twin, but I didn't know your name. So nice to meet you. Are you guys identical or fraternal? Let's see. Are the umbilical arteries and veins used after birth? No, they actually shrink up into, they call them ligaments, although they don't function like other ligaments in your body, but just sort of into little threads, kind of. So no, they shrivel up basically and go away after birth. There's a whole bunch of interesting changes that happen. We used to teach fetal circulation, and right after birth, those blood vessels sort of close off, right? Because now there's nowhere for that blood to go, right? So they sort of close off and become non-functional. Ashwin, how many questions? So I mentioned before, there's 36 stations, but at each station, there's an average of about 3 questions. So at the end, there's about 100. Jesus, where does the vas deferens lead to, and what is its function? It's a separate tube from the penis. Yes, it's before you even get to the penis. Okay, so the tube that's inside the penis is the urethra. It is continuous. Okay, so probably at the base of the penis is where you stop calling it the vas deferens and you start calling it the urethra. The other difference is the vas deferens. There's technically sort of 2 of them in a way, right? Because they're coming testes, epididymis around the testes, vas deferens coming from either side, and then those 2 sort of join in to the urethra. So fluid from both vas deferens could go into the urethra. Okay, so they are separate, but if the sperm is moving, it moves continuously through them, like it's kind of one continuous tube. But the part that's surrounding the testes is called the epididymis. As it comes out of the scrotal sac, it's called the vas deferens, and then when it goes into the penis, it's called the urethra. Okay, but it is a continuous tube for sperm and eventually semen. Does the larynx filter the air before it enters the lower respiratory tract? It's not the main function of the larynx. The larynx is this sort of expanded area for making sound, right? I don't know that it has much in the way of cilia in the way that the trachea does. It's certainly not its main function. So, and the cilia, my guess, just off the top of my head, is having a bunch of cilia and mucus would make it hard to make sound, right? So I don't think so. I think that most of the cilia and mucus is happening down in the trachea. Okay, 10 more minutes for me, guys. I'm getting pretty tired. Is the scrotum-scrotal sac part of the reproductive integumentary? Again, they involve skin and membrane, so you could say there's some integumentary stuff going on there, but certainly for our purposes, we think of them as reproductive because their function is reproductive, right? But all skin, including the skin around the scrotum, is part of the integumentary system, so there's going to be some cross-system stuff going on there. Neil is asking about finding the pancreas, okay? So, always look below the stomach. It's between the stomach and the small intestine. One end of it's kind of stuck to the small intestine. It's sort of in the middle, so not as far over as the spleen, but it's going to sort of start in the middle and slightly to the pig's right, and then there's this sort of triangular part that tends to stick out on the pig's left toward the spleen. But you're going to look for something that is sort of long and skinny, a little bit pointy at the end, a little spongy, cottage cheese looking, right? Relatively narrow between the stomach and the small intestine, okay? Usually whitish, on some pigs darker, okay? So just look for location, texture, shape, all of that to help you. Thanks for helping with the scrotum question, Sophia. Time limit for each question. I can't say per question, each station is 1 minute. But some of the stations have 1 question, some of the stations have 3 questions. Okay, thanks for making me laugh. She was asking, why is it called the fetus if it isn't in the feet? Har, har, har. Appreciate that. There's actually some good anatomy jokes. I can't think of them. I'm too tired to think of them right now, but I'll try to remember to share them with you. There's some really funny anatomy jokes. Will spelling count? Yes, 1/2 point. Do we need to be able to identify the sphincters? No. Thanks for asking, Kanal. When open heart surgery is happening, how does one breathe? Typically, I mean, it's not related to the practical, but typically you're on a ventilator, so they're literally like squeezing air into your lungs, right? Because you're under heavy anesthesia, so your whole system is depressed and you can't really breathe normally, so they're going to be pumping air into your lungs. I already talked about the esophagus. The descending aorta is down the back of the pig, right near the esophagus, actually, and it's going to be long, right, for all the way from the sort of above your heart to down in your abdomen. How many sentences are expected to answer each question? Most of them can be answered in a phrase. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 that you would need sort of 2 phrases, but again, you're going to try to be concise. You're welcome, Jerry. Glad I could help. Oh, nice to know. Okay, so you guys are fraternal twins. Awesome. So remember, that's 2 eggs, 2 sperm, right? So what happens is oftentimes an egg comes out of both the left and the right ovary, and they're both fertilized. Sometimes it has to do with people doing fertility technology, what's called assisted reproduction, where the mother is taking drugs to cause more than 1 egg to be released, or more than 1 embryo is put back in the uterus, and that way, kind of insurance, right? So we have a lot more twins in multiple births than we used to because of reproductive technology. So I don't know if you guys are a result of some of that technology or if it was just a natural set of fraternal twins, which is not that uncommon. And it's a little bit genetic, but not too uncommon. How is blood produced in the fetus? The same way it's produced in you, in their bone marrow, right? So this is hard for people to sort of grasp, but the fetus is making itself, right? That's really cool. It's getting raw materials from the mother, but the fetus is doing all the work, right? It's building, its cells are dividing and specializing. So some of them specialized into hemopoietic stem cells, and they're in the developing bone marrow, and they're making blood cells, right? So, you know, it's literally building itself. Pretty amazing process. The function of epididymis, we actually hit that earlier, so I don't want to repeat too much, but maturation of the sperm, contractions causing ejaculation, etc. And Ritvik is asking when the fetus first develops, the blood is already there, but actually not quite. No, it really isn't. It really is making it. The blood developed from blood stem cells that came from the original embryonic stem cells, right? It's kind of crazy amazing how that works. Thank you for chiming in about the epididymis there. Does the vagina count as the excretory system because during menstruation blood tissue and lining are discharged? No, it doesn't. I mean, that's a good question because in a way you could say it's excreted. Excreted is a more general term, but no, it's definitely part of the reproductive system. There's things that come out of our body like, I don't know, mucus comes out your nose, right? We don't consider that excretory. Certain things are excretory like sweat, but not that. Thank you, bejesus. I appreciate the compliment, but I'm definitely fortunate to work with some pretty awesome biology teachers. TYSM, do I know that one? Oh, I think it's thank you so much. I have to think about it. Thanks, Ritvik. Oh, thank you. I think she spelt learn wrong. I don't know if that's a joke about my name, but I do love the fact that my name is Learner, even though it's spelled a little bit differently, just to keep it interesting. Let's see. Okay, I'm glad that was helpful to you guys. Yeah, I'm going to try to wrap up soon. I'm just kind of scrolling through here to see if there's anything I haven't answered. Jejunum and ileum are just the second two parts of the small intestine. The first part is the main one we talk about. It's kind of where all the exciting stuff happens with the bile and the pancreatic juice and all that. And that's called the duodenum or the duodenum, some people say. So the small intestine actually has these three segments. We don't really need to know. We don't really study a lot what happens in the other ones, mostly just more and more digestion and absorption, okay? So don't worry about that. Those are just the second and third segments of the small intestine, but we're never going to include that in an assessment. You're welcome, Aditi. I'm glad it was helpful. I would have liked to have something like visual to show you guys. I still got to work that part out, but I'm glad it was helpful. Do all the coronary arteries branch off from the left side of the heart? There is a main left branch of the coronary artery, and then I think a smaller right branch, but it comes originally from one. But remember that the left ventricle of the heart is the biggest portion of the heart by far, because it's pumping the blood through the aorta. So that is kind of the biggest, fattest artery. You could look up a nice picture showing all the coronary arteries if you want a visual of that. They sort of disperse out in this big sort of spider web. But, for our purposes, there's sort of a main one, and then it branches and branches. You're welcome, Diksha. Oh, I'm so glad, Polly. I'm glad you're feeling better. You're going to be fine, okay? Ritvik, cesarean section is when, for whatever reason, the baby cannot be born through the vagina, and so you make an incision through the abdomen, kind of through the belly of the woman, and you cut into the top of the uterus, and you just, literally kind of lift the baby out of this incision. So it's a big incision, and that's done for a variety of reasons when it might not be safe for the baby to go out through the vagina, or maybe it's just not working and the baby's getting stressed, right, and you need to get it out. So there's a number of reasons why you would have a cesarean section type birth, as opposed to what would be called vaginal delivery. You're welcome, Neil. Take care. Kanal, you're welcome. T3, T4. Those are both types of hormones produced by the thyroid. Again, they aren't exactly the same. I think one is actually converted into the other. But for purposes of this class, thyroxine is fine. Okay? Do we have to know the average sperm count of a male? I don't find that particularly useful information myself. Okay? For one thing, it's an average, and there's quite a range, and no, we don't usually count. Don't worry about it, unless you're trying to gauge his fertility. Can you go over the reproductive system? That is a pretty broad question for me to do at this point in the evening. If you can pipe in with a quick specific question, I can try to answer that. You're welcome, Anusha. How fast can sperm swim? I don't know, as fast as the little tails can take them. It's not very far. Yeah, I'm going to try to do more of these study sessions. Obviously not a lot more time this year, but I'm planning on at least one more. Probably actually at least two more. You're welcome, Frank. Hope your arm is getting better. Your wrist? There goes your wrist. The function of the fallopian tubes and the hormone cells that get produced. Again, I can give a very brief answer. The fallopian tubes are basically transport of the eggs to the uterus. The main thing about them is the location where fertilization occurs. The ovaries, of course, are where the eggs are doing some development, parts of meiosis, sort of being protected and nurtured and growing into the right kind of egg, and then they come out in the process of ovulation into the ovaries. Okay, and then the hormones, estrogen and progesterone, have a lot of functions. The sort of main one that relates to this class is they help to make the menstrual cycle work, but they actually do a whole bunch of other stuff in our bodies as well. You're welcome, Vikram, Eric. Nice to see you guys tonight. Julie, oh, nice to see you. I don't think I saw your name pop up before. I'm glad you enjoyed it. You're welcome, South Africa. Left ventricle is the biggest section. Does that mean that the bicuspid mitral valve and the aortic valves are the strongest valves? I haven't heard it put that way. It's more of a medical issue when you have a problem with your mitral valve. I don't know. I guess I would say they probably are a little bit. I don't know if a valve is strong. It doesn't pump. I imagine they're probably structurally a little bit different because there is kind of more blood flow through them. I don't know a lot about that. Was Michael Phelps' sperm faster? Good question. I don't know. It's certainly successful, right? It made it. Can you show your cat again? No, he's not on my lap anymore. Neither one. They're sleeping somewhere. So they're impatient. They move around. Oh, hi, John. Haven't seen you tonight either yet. You're welcome. Ovum is the singular of ova. Okay, it's the word for egg. So if you think ovulate, right? Ovum, it's one of these Latin things. So is a singular and a is plural. So ovum is a single egg. Ova is plural eggs. Is life a sexually transmitted disease? I like that. You got some good jokes tonight. Okay, I guess it sort of is, although I try not to think of life as a disease. You're welcome, Tina. Bring your cat to school. Yeah, I think my cat would not appreciate that. By the way, it looks like the live stream is frozen on the screen that I can see, so hopefully it's still working for you guys. Yes, I thought it was your wrist, Frank. Yeah, and there's a lot of tiny little bones in your wrist, so I think they're almost healed. Do T cells mature in the thymus, or is their development only stimulated by the thymus? My understanding is here's one of them coming, that the thymus, that the thymus is both releasing the hormones and that the hormones are stimulating the maturation. Seems like they don't have to go very far, right? I don't actually know a ton about the thymus outside of the idea of immunocompetence and the fact that it's only active when you're younger. I don't know a lot about what that hormone does, to be honest. It's one of those things I should probably learn because it comes up. Oh, you're welcome, Megan. Thanks for joining us tonight. Do women also produce testosterone? Yes, they do, just in different amounts, right? That came up during sex determination, right? This idea of women and men produce testosterone in different amounts, and that's going to have different effects on their body, right? It's actually fairly complex. Hormones can actually be interconverted between the androgens, which are sort of the male ones like testosterone, and the estrogens. And they're chemically not that much different. They're all steroid hormones. So the body can actually sort of interconvert some of these hormones. And they are both, lots of them are present in both males and females. And they have effects in females that are important as well, related to sex drive and a few other things. How long does it take for blood to circulate through the body? Vikram, I think I've known that on occasion. The figure that comes to my mind is like 45 seconds or something. I can't remember for sure. That's one of those little factoids you could easily find. But, and again, it doesn't mean a single blood cell went all over your body. I bet you that refers to like going out of the heart and back to the heart, right? It didn't go to every part of your body. It went to like one part of your body. I was here. I just haven't asked questions. That's okay. Not everybody has to ask questions. I'm glad that you got your questions answered. Raghu, is this correct? Plasma 90% water and 10% dissolved gases, hormones, enzymes, and nutrients. Yes, I believe that's what it says in the PowerPoint. And remember, plasma is the liquidy part. About half your blood is actually red blood cells and other kinds of cells. Pinky is back with me here. You're very welcome, Siri. Good night. Yeah, I'm going to wrap up here soon. Liver and the spleen similar. I don't know that they're similar. They do share some functions. They're both organs that have many kinds of functions, because you got to remember most of the function happens at the cellular level. So they have many kinds of cells, not kinds of cells. They have cells that can do many functions, right? In that way, they're similar. Do we need to know the parts of the penis like the shaft? Not specifically for this purpose. I was actually talking about that again this morning this afternoon in my physiology class. The shaft is sort of the long part of the penis as opposed to the head part where the opening is and where it's sort of a little larger. We may get to that a little bit next week, but for purposes of this right now, no. I know them by heart. Yeah, that's good. I've used that in class too. Thank you. I know them by heart. I need to incorporate some more anatomy jokes. I have much learned. Night good, Miss Lerner. Night good to you, Kevin. Does the thyroid also regulate body temp, breathing, and heart rate? Partially, I would say. Those things are all related to metabolism. So when we say it regulates metabolism, it actually affects a lot of things, as some hormones do, right? So the thyroid will have an effect on things like body temperature, heart rate, and breathing a little bit. There's going to be other things that affect those much more. Ultimately, your brainstem controls those, but hormones like adrenaline and thyroxine can affect them a little bit. But many, many things are going to affect your breathing and your heart rate, not just thyroxine. Okay. Even same with cellular respiration. It's a complex system. Ragu, are white blood cells in all lymphatic organs? I would think so, yes, because they're in the lymph. How many alveoli are in one lung? Only because believe me, my brain isn't filled up with all this. Somebody just said it to me a few days ago. It's, I think, 350 million or something. Would you say that the gallbladder is part of the liver? No, it's really not, actually. If you look closely at the pig, it's like a little teardrop-shaped bag, and it's like this little wrinkly bag, and it's like embedded underneath the lobe of the liver, but it's not part of it. The tube comes out and just sort of bypasses the liver. There's a bile duct where the bile is carried from the liver into the small intestine, but no, it's not part of it at all. It's a sac as opposed to tissue made of cells. Is adrenaline like a temporary thyroxine? No, not really. I know what you mean because both of them sort of speed things up in a way, but adrenaline ultimately has a bunch of different effects and much more dramatic effects. Thyroxine is kind of more over time. Adrenaline is like within seconds and minutes. Very, very dramatic effects to get us to, maximize all our power, right? Thanks, Ritvik. Yeah, and I don't know. I never counted the alveoli. I'm not sure how many millions it is. Good night, Ritvik. Thanks for your help tonight. I appreciate you piping in with some answers to the questions. That's helpful. Good night to you, Aditi. Vitamins B and K. Vitamins have multiple functions. The only one that jumps to mind is vitamin K has to do with blood clotting. So it's kind of known for that. Vitamin B, there's a whole bunch of B vitamins that relate to a number of things. Some of them are active in the process of cellular respiration. Some of them I know that, but I don't know what all of them do. You're welcome, Akash. Good night to you, too. Good night, John. Where does the blood flow into the penis during erection? Into blood vessels, and then it goes into these chambers where the blood vessels are and causes the erection, and then it eventually drains back into the blood vessels. My cat was up here momentarily, and he just left again, so I can't show him to you right now. I'm sorry. Is peritoneum... He's eating some food right now. Pericardium considered part of circulatory or integumentary. Pericardium could be either, but again, I won't ask. Peritoneum would be integumentary, but I won't ask. Okay, you're welcome, Neha. Good night to you too. Lacteals lead directly to lymphatic vessels. Yeah, they are small lymphatic vessels. Here, you want to come up here one more time for an encore? Maybe not. You have a good night too, Aditi. Okay, and you're welcome, Arul. I appreciate all the time you guys put in studying. I know it's a lot of work, so I want to be happy if I can help you out. I don't know that I would call diarrhea and constipation diseases. They're sort of conditions or symptoms of diseases, right? So diarrhea could be a symptom, for example, of, I don't know, the flu or something, right? So it's a symptom of a disease. It's not really a disease in itself. Can you try pronouncing my name? Sukok? I don't know. That's the best I could do. If it's different from that, you could try to spell it out for me. Good night, Sham. You're welcome. Anshul says, I disconnected before you answered my question. Is it okay if you can answer this question again? Do T cells mature in the thymus, or is it development only caused by thymus and released by the thymus? Yeah, I gave probably a very dissatisfying answer to that, Anshul, because I talked about, I think it's actually both. Okay, my understanding is that the thymus both releases the thymosin, which by the way has no E, and that it's also the location where this maturation occurs. So my thought is that this hormone doesn't actually have to go very far, right? But I've always been in my mind sort of unclear. I never looked it up. like what thymosin actually does, okay? Like how it actually causes this process to happen. So I don't have a good answer to that in particular, but both of those things do happen in the thymus. What does cartilage do to support the trachea? Cartilage is literally like a hard material. It's kind of like what makes your nose quite a bit harder than other parts of you, right? So basically that's super important because if the trachea was soft and something pushed against my throat, it would just squeeze and cut off my air. So you want it to be kind of hard. It's really difficult to push in the trachea and cut off the airflow, which is good, right? So really it's just providing support so that the trachea doesn't get, squished down and block the airway very easily. And the rings, I think, are more structural support as well. I think the rings help to keep that round shape again so that it can't get compressed very easily. Thanks for putting your tail in front of the screen, Mr. Pinky Boy. I think I'm going to volunteer you for a quick look here. Okay, there you go. Your crazy feet sticking out. Look at his feet sticking out. There you go, Mr. Pinky Boy, and his pretty white fur and his pretty pink pads. Okay, he's only going to put up with that for so long. Yes, the thymus is a lymphatic organ. How does the scrotum maintain homeostasis? That's going to have to do with maintaining the temperature, as I mentioned before, sort of maintaining the homeostasis of the temperature for sperm development. Okay. You're welcome, Anshul. I think you're ready. Go to sleep and get some good sleep. I'm glad you love Pinky. I love him too. Okay, last call. I'm going to start to sign off here because I'm pretty tired. But you guys rock. Thanks for hanging in there, and get some good rest. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and we will wrap up those pigs. Okay, so take it easy. Have a good night, everybody. And that's all. Sweet dreams. Bye-bye.